You know, sometimes your own betrayal doesn't come crashing down on you like a storm. It sneaks in quietly, almost politely, like a smile that hides a knife. This story is about how I learned that lesson the hard way, and how, with patience and calm planning, I turned the tables so completely that the very people who cheated me ended up begging for my help. Let me start from the beginning. I was never someone who liked shortcuts. My life had always been about steady effort, discipline, and trust. I believed in working honestly, and I believed that when you give trust, people will return it. Naive, maybe, but that's who I was. Back then, I was running a small but promising business. Nothing fancy, just a modest company I had built from scratch. We were in the field of event planning, weddings, corporate parties, small community gatherings. I had a good eye for organization, and people started recommending me. Now, here's the thing about starting out small. You can't do everything on your own. You need partners. You need people who will stand beside you and help you grow. And I thought I had found those people. There were 3 of them. Let's call them Mark, Sophie, and Daniel. Mark was sharp with numbers. He handled the finances, the contracts, the budgeting. Sophie had charm. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and walk out with 3 new clients. And Daniel, he was the creative one. He could transform a dull hall into something magical with just fabric, lighting, and flowers. Together, we made a strong team, or so I thought. The early days were exciting. We were working out of a tiny office, barely enough space for 4 desks and a coffee machine, but the energy was electric. We'd stay late, brainstorming ideas, laughing, eating takeout dinners, and dreaming about how big the company could become. For me, this wasn't just a business. It was a family. I trusted them. I opened every door I could for them, even when it meant taking risks with my own finances. And then, slowly, little signs started appearing. I remember one evening. This was after we had landed a big contract with a hotel chain, a huge opportunity, the kind that could take us from a small name to something bigger. We were supposed to celebrate. But Mark and Sophie kept exchanging looks, whispering things to each other when they thought I wasn't watching. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I was imagining it. After all, paranoia is the enemy of trust, right? But then invoices started going missing. Payments that were supposed to come to the company account ended up delayed. When I checked, the clients insisted they had paid already. I asked Mark about it. He smiled, that calm, reassuring smile, and told me not to worry. "Accounting takes time," he said. "I've got it under control." I wanted to believe him. I did believe him, because trust, once given, doesn't die quickly. But trust isn't blind. One night, after finishing a client call, I stayed back in the office. Everyone else had left. Out of habit, I glanced at Mark's desk, and something caught my eye. A folder, left half open, with bank statements inside. Curiosity, or maybe instinct, pushed me to take a closer look. And there it was. Money, transferred little by little from the company account into one under Mark's name. At first, I felt a sharp punch of disbelief. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he was just holding it temporarily. But then I noticed Sophie's name on one of the payment approvals, and Daniel's signature on another document. It wasn't a mistake. They were in it together. It's hard to describe that feeling. Betrayal isn't just about the money. It's about the weight of realizing that the people you trusted, your so-called family, were quietly stealing from you. I sat there, in that tiny office, staring at the papers. My hands felt cold, my chest heavy. The celebration we had shared, the laughter, the "we're in this together" promises, it all replayed in my head, but now with a sour taste. That night, I made a decision. Not the kind of impulsive, rage-driven decision you see in movies. I didn't want to storm in and confront them. That would have given them power, made me look desperate, emotional. No. I decided to wait, to watch, to plan. Because if they thought they could cheat me and walk away, they had no idea who they were dealing with. For weeks, I played the part. I smiled at meetings, praised their work, acted like nothing had changed. Meanwhile, I started gathering evidence. I copied files, collected emails, tracked payments quietly. I built my case, carefully, patiently. And all the while, they thought they were getting away with it. I could see their arrogance growing. Sophie started taking the lead in meetings, almost as if she was the face of the company now. Daniel acted like his ideas were the backbone of everything, and Mark had that smug calmness, like someone who believed the game was already won. But games aren't won until the last move is played. One afternoon, Sophie casually mentioned they were thinking of expanding. I asked what she meant, pretending to be curious. She gave me this sly smile and said, "Well, maybe we should open another office, for the future." That was my confirmation. They weren't just stealing, they were planning to cut me out entirely. I stayed calm, because I knew something they didn't. The house of cards they were building was going to collapse, and I would be the one holding the final card. So, where did I leave off? Right. At the moment, I discovered that the people I trusted most were slowly carving me out of my own company. You'd think the natural response would be anger, confrontation, maybe even shouting matches in boardrooms or bitter late-night phone calls, but that wasn't my way. I knew that anger would only give them fuel. People who betray you, they expect you to explode. They prepare for it. No, my weapon was patience and silence. Over the next few months, I let the game play out exactly as they wanted it to. They thought they were clever, moving money under my nose, whispering behind my back, making their little plans. But the truth was, every step they took was like them digging their own hole, deeper and deeper. The more arrogant they became, the more careless they grew. I noticed Sophie had started contacting some of our old clients privately, almost as if she was presenting herself as the face of the company. She'd invite them for coffee, pitch new services, and act like it was her vision driving everything. She didn't know that one of those clients was close to me. The client casually mentioned it, saying, "It feels like Sophie is running things these days." Daniel, meanwhile, had grown bold in other ways. He started hiring assistants behind my back, claiming they were temporary staff. But when I looked closer, I realized he was preparing to shift operations under his own name. He even ordered business cards with his personal brand on them. The arrogance was almost insulting. And Mark, he was the quiet one, the orchestrator. He stayed calm, polite, professional on the surface, but his fingerprints were on every suspicious transaction, every missing payment, every forged approval. I could have stopped them at any time. I could have walked into the office with the stack of evidence I had gathered and destroyed them instantly. But no, that would have been too easy. They had chosen to cheat me. I would choose to let them believe they had won, until the moment they realized they hadn't. Now here's the part that required discipline. I had to let them push me out. Not literally, but symbolically. I made myself look smaller, quieter, almost irrelevant. I stopped attending some of the meetings. I let Sophie handle clients. I let Daniel show off his grand creative ideas. I even allowed Mark to oversee the accounts without interference. At first, it felt painful. Imagine watching something you built with your own sweat and energy slowly being taken over by people who didn't respect it. But I reminded myself, this was not the end. This was the beginning of the revenge. By stepping back, I gave them rope, and they were more than happy to hang themselves with it. It was around this time that they revealed their grand plan. One evening, after a client meeting, they invited me for drinks. I accepted, playing along. We sat in a cozy little bar, laughter all around, glasses clinking. And then Mark leaned in, his voice calm, but with that smug edge I had learned to recognize. "We've been talking," he said, "and we think it's time the company takes a new direction, a bigger, bolder vision." I smiled and asked, "What kind of direction?" Sophie jumped in, her eyes bright. "Expansion. We want to form a new branch, and we think it's best if you step back. You know, take on a smaller role, more like an advisor." I remember the exact words, advisor. They wanted me to be a guest in my own house. Inside, I felt the sting, but on the surface, I stayed calm. I nodded, even pretended to consider it seriously. "That makes sense," I said softly. "I trust you three. If this is what's best, I'll support it." Their relief was almost comical. They thought they had won. They thought I had accepted my exile. But what they didn't realize was that every signature they pushed me to sign, every document they slid across the table, every careless email they sent, it was all going into my collection, piece by piece. I was building a fortress of evidence. By the time 6 months had passed, they had essentially built a second company. It was in Sophie's name, with Daniel as the creative director and Mark managing finances. They had siphoned a good portion of our existing clients into this new venture. And they were bold enough to use our resources to build it. Our office supplies, our staff, even our event equipment. It was theft dressed up as ambition. But here's the thing, they weren't good enough, not without me. See, while Sophie was charming, she wasn't reliable. She made promises she couldn't keep. Daniel was talented, but impractical. His ideas looked great on paper, but often blew budgets out of proportion. And Mark, well, he was too greedy. Instead of reinvesting in the new company, he pocketed a lot of the funds. So, while they were busy trying to push me out, the cracks in their empire were already forming. Clients began to complain. Projects started running late. Payments bounced. And that's when I knew it was time to move. One of the biggest opportunities of the year was a contract with a multinational corporation. It was huge, far bigger than anything we'd handled before. Naturally, Sophie and Daniel wanted it. They pitched aggressively, promised the moon, and celebrated when they won the bid. But they had no idea what they were walking into. Because I already knew this client. Quietly, I had maintained the relationship, and I knew exactly what they expected. Precision, discipline, no tolerance for errors. The kind of discipline that only I could provide. So I sat back and watched as Sophie and Daniel scrambled, overpromised, and underdelivered. Deadlines slipped. Costs ballooned. The client grew frustrated. Finally, one late evening, I got the call. Not from my partners, but from the client directly. "We don't know what's happening," the manager said, his voice sharp. "This isn't what we signed up for. You used to run things smoothly. Where are you in all of this?" That was the moment, the turning point. I could have told him everything right then. I could have exposed my partners and reclaimed the project. But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I said calmly, "I'm still here, just in a different role, but if you want, I can step in again. Quietly, let me handle it." He agreed immediately. And that's when the trap truly began to tighten. Behind the scenes, I took control. I reorganized the mess they had created, salvaged timelines, smoothed over client frustrations, but I did it quietly, without them realizing. Every time they thought they were fixing something, it was really me pulling the strings. And when the project finally succeeded, who do you think the client credited? Not Sophie, not Daniel, not Mark. Me. Word spread quickly. Other clients began reaching out to me directly, bypassing them entirely. Some even refused to work with their new company unless I was involved. It was like watching their empire crumble in slow motion. And still, I stayed calm, patient. I let them think they could fix it. I let them stumble, fall, crawl, and beg their way back up. Because I wasn't just going to take back what was mine, I was going to make them ask me for help. They thought they had cut me out, but little did they know I was pulling the strings all along. And in the final act, they would be on their knees, realizing that the only person who could save them was the one they betrayed. When you've been betrayed, the temptation is to strike quickly. But I had learned something important during those long months of waiting. Revenge is most powerful when it's patient. By the time we reached the final stage, they had already dug their own graves. All I had to do was give a gentle push. It started with the client base. Remember that big contract, the multinational corporation project? The one they thought would make them industry leaders? Well, it ended up being their undoing. See, when I quietly stepped in and salvaged the project, the client saw the truth with their own eyes. They saw the difference between chaos and calm, between promises and results, between them and me. They didn't confront Sophie or Daniel directly. That's not how big corporations work. They simply adjusted their future contracts. All new projects, they were addressed to me, not to the company name, not to the team, but to me personally. At first, my so-called partners didn't notice. They were too busy patting themselves on the back, pretending they had handled the crisis. But slowly, like water dripping into a bucket, the realization began to seep in. One morning, Sophie stormed into the office, her face flushed. "Why are the new proposals being sent under your name?" she demanded. I looked at her calmly. "I don't know," I said softly. "Maybe the client prefers dealing with me." Daniel was less confrontational, but more anxious. "It's fine," he said, trying to soothe Sophie. "As long as the projects come in, we're still in control." But even he didn't sound convinced. And Mark, he stayed quiet, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He knew what was happening. Meanwhile, their new company was falling apart. The staff they had hired began leaving one by one. Payments weren't coming in on time. Vendors were refusing to work with them because of unpaid bills. And word spread, because in our industry, reputations are like glass. Once they crack, everyone notices. I watched all of this unfold quietly, calmly, without gloating, because the best revenge isn't loud. It doesn't scream, it whispers. The breaking point came when they landed another big contract. At least, they thought they had. It was a luxury wedding, one of the most high-profile events of the year. Sophie had promised the couple a magical experience, and Daniel had designed an elaborate plan filled with extravagant details. But here's the problem. They didn't have the resources to pull it off. Not the money, not the staff, not even the equipment. They had burned too many bridges, and no one wanted to work with them anymore. 3 weeks before the wedding, everything started collapsing. The decorator canceled. The catering company refused to supply until old bills were cleared. Even the venue threatened to back out unless they received their deposit. I knew about all of this because, of course, the vendors still trusted me. They called me quietly, explaining the situation, asking whether they should even bother continuing with those people. That was when I knew the moment had arrived. It was late one evening when they finally came to me. I was in my office, working calmly on my own projects, when I heard the door open. Sophie walked in first, followed by Daniel, and then Mark. Their energy was different. Gone was the arrogance, the smugness, the sly confidence. What I saw instead was desperation. Sophie spoke first, her voice tight. We need your help. I leaned back in my chair, pretending to be surprised. My help? I thought you three had everything under control. Daniel stepped forward, his tone almost pleading. The wedding. It's falling apart. If we don't fix this, we're finished. Everyone will know. Mark, always the calm one, finally broke his silence. His words were careful, almost rehearsed. Look, we made mistakes, but you're the only one who can salvage this. You have the connections, the respect. If you step in now, maybe we can turn this around. And there it was. The very people who cheated me, stole from me, and tried to push me out were now standing in front of me, begging for my help. Inside, I felt a rush of emotions: anger, satisfaction, even pity. But on the outside, I stayed calm. Why should I help you? I asked softly. Sophie looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Daniel's shoulders slumped, and Mark, the one who had orchestrated so much of this, spoke quietly. Because without you, we're finished. For a long moment, I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, heavy and uncomfortable. Let them feel the weight of their choices. Finally, I nodded slowly. I'll help, but on my terms. My terms were simple but final. First, they would sign over full control of the company to me. Every share, every right, every piece of ownership. Second, they would put in writing, legal, binding documents, that they had mismanaged funds and that I was stepping in to stabilize everything. Third, once the wedding was done, they would resign. All of them. Quietly, without drama. At first, Sophie protested. That's not fair, she cried. We built this too. I looked at her, calm and steady. Did you? Or did you steal it? She had no answer. Daniel didn't even argue. He just nodded, exhausted. And Mark, he tried to negotiate, of course, but he quickly realized he had no leverage. Without me, they were doomed. So, reluctantly, they all agreed. The next 3 weeks were some of the busiest of my life. I stepped in, reorganized the entire wedding plan, called in favors from vendors, and personally oversaw every detail. It was exhausting, but it was also invigorating. The event was a success. No, more than that. It was flawless. The couple was thrilled, the guests were amazed, and the industry buzzed with praise. My reputation, already strong, became unshakable. And my former partners? They stood on the sidelines, watching as I did what they never could. Watching as the clients praised me, the vendors thanked me, and the spotlight returned where it had always belonged. A week later, the paperwork was finalized. The company was mine, fully, legally, and undeniably. Sophie disappeared from the industry. Daniel tried to start his own small venture, but it never took off. And Mark, well, he found work elsewhere, but never in a position of trust again. And me? I continued to build, stronger than before, wiser, calmer. Because here's the truth. Revenge doesn't have to be loud or cruel or violent. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply letting people destroy themselves and then making them realize that the only way out is through the person they tried to betray. So when I look back, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel calm. They cheated me, but in the end, they begged for my help. And that was more satisfying than anything I could have planned. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more calm but powerful tales of revenge, please like this video, share it with someone who'll appreciate it, and subscribe to my Calm Revenge. Your support helps me bring more stories like this to you.